Okay, welcome back. And just a reminder that the reason we work on boundaries is because God says the greatest thing that we could ever do is to love Him and love others. And if you're like me, you've probably failed at some point in at least one or maybe all relationships, like I have. So we don't want to do that. We want to live the abundant life that Jesus says we can live. And by knowing the principles of boundaries, that's exactly what we get to do. So the bottom of page 141, here we go, is boundaries in your friends. Conflict number 2, compliant aggressive controller. The compliant aggressive controller conflict, the most identifiable of friendship conflicts, has classic symptoms. The compliant feels intimidated and inferior in the relationship. The aggressive controller feels irritated at being pestered by the compliant. Well, all right, if you insist, is a catchphrase of the compliant. Usually, the aggressive controller is insisting on using some of the compliant's time, talents, or treasures. The aggressive controller has no problem demanding what she wants. Sometimes she just takes what she wants without asking. I needed it is reason enough for the aggressive controller to help herself to whatever the compliant has, be it car keys, a cup of sugar, or 3 hours of time. Since the compliant is usually unhappy in this relationship, he is the one who needs to take action. Let's put this relationship through the boundary checklist. What are the symptoms? The compliant feels controlled and resentful. The aggressive controller feels good, except she doesn't like being pestered. Number 2, what are the roots? The compliant probably grew up in a family who taught him to avoid conflict rather than embrace it. The aggressive controller never received training in delaying gratification and in taking responsibility for herself. Number 3, what is the boundary conflict? 2 specific boundary conflicts are the inability of the compliant to set clear limits with his friend and the inability of the aggressive controller to respect the compliance limits. Number 4, who needs to take ownership? The compliant needs to see that he isn't a victim of the aggressive controller. He is volunteering his power to his friend on a silver platter. Giving up his power is his way of controlling his friend. The compliant controls the aggressive controller by pleasing her, hoping it will appease her and cause her to change her behavior. The aggressive controller needs to own that she has difficulty listening to no and accepting the limits of others. She needs to take responsibility for her need to control her friend. Number 5, what is needed? Getting out of the sun here. What is needed? The unhappier one in the friendship, the compliant, needs to plug into a supportive group of people to help him with his boundary conflict. Number 6, how do they begin? In preparation for confronting his friend, the compliant needs to practice setting limits in his support group. The aggressive controller could really benefit from honest feedback from loving friends on how she runs over people and how she can learn to respect the limits of others. Number 7, how do they set boundaries? The compliant applies biblical principles to his friendship in Matthew 18. He confronts his friend on her control and intimidation, and he tells her that the next time she tries to control him, he will leave. He does not attempt to control her. Confrontation isn't an ultimatum meant to rob her of her choices. He sets limits to let her know that her control hurts him and wounds their friendship. Such limits protect the compliant from further hurt. The aggressive controller can become as angry or intimidating as she wants, but the compliant won't be around to get hurt. He will be out of the room, the house, or the friendship until it's safe to come back. The aggressive controller experiences the consequences of her actions. Not having her friend around may force her to miss the attachment, and she may begin to take responsibility for the control that ran off her friend. Number 8, now what? At this point, if both friends are open, the two can renegotiate the relationship. They can set new ground rules, such as, I'll stop pestering you if you'll stop being critical. And they can build a new friendship. Conflict number 3, compliant manipulative controller. Kathy, I'm in a real jam, and you're the only one I can depend on to help me out. I can't get a babysitter for the kids, and I have this church meeting. Kathy listened to the plight of her friend Sharon. It was the usual story. Sharon neglected to plan for events, to call ahead for sitters. She often called Kathy to help out in these self-induced emergencies. Kathy hated being stuck in this position. Sharon didn't do it on purpose, and she needed her for a good cause, but Kathy still felt used and exploited. What should she do? Many friendships get stuck in this interaction between compliance and manipulative controllers. Why do we call Sharon controlling? She's not consciously trying to manipulate her friend. However, no matter what her good intentions are, when she's in a jam, Sharon uses her friends. She takes them for granted, thinking that they shouldn't mind doing a favor for her. Her friends go along saying, well, that's just Sharon. They stifle their resentment. Let's run this through our boundary checklist. Number 1, what are the symptoms? The compliant Kathy feels resentment at the manipulative controller's last-minute requests. Kathy feels as though her friendship is being taken for granted. She begins to avoid her friend. What are the roots? Sharon's parents rescued her from every jam, from typing term papers at 3 a.m. to lending her money when she was well into her 30s. She lived in a very forgiving universe where nice people would always help her out. She never had to face her own irresponsibility and lack of discipline and planning. As a child, Kathy didn't like her mother's hurt look when she said no. She grew up afraid of hurting others by setting boundaries. Kathy would do anything to avoid conflict with friends, especially with Sharon. Number 3, what is the boundary conflict? Sharon doesn't plan ahead and take responsibility for her schedule. When responsibilities, quote, get away from her, she calls out to the nearest compliant for help, and Kathy comes running. Okay, so I just want to take a moment to talk about this because I have been this person. And what was driving my behavior was a couple of things. Number 1, I was afraid to ask for help. Number 2, I think that was just the biggest thing. Like, I was so terrified of people saying no that I would just wait until the last minute, because then if it didn't work out, it was like, well, I wasn't really planning on it anyway, which is not a healthy way to do friendships, but it was what was going on for me. And I think, as I'm reading through these conflicts, what keeps coming to mind is a fear of loss of love. That's why I wouldn't confront. That's why I wouldn't set limits. That's why I behaved the way I did. It was all because I was afraid that I wasn't going to be loved really anyway. And so I just would show up however I showed up. And if it worked, it worked. And if it didn't, I kind of took it as like, well, see, I didn't really lose anything, which is not a healthy way of going about it. But until we're like deeply, deeply rooted in the love that Jesus has for us, which can take a very long time. It doesn't have to, but it can. It did for me. Until we're really deeply rooted in his love for us, it's hard to plan ahead. It's hard to kind of put together all the pieces that make friendship so sweet. And instead, friendship is just kind of hard. So let's continue, shall we? Such good information. Okay. Number 4, who needs to take ownership? Kathy, the motivated party in this conflict, sees how her never-ending yes contributes to Sharon's illusion that she doesn't ever have to plan ahead. See, it's an illusion. Kathy needs to stop feeling like a victim and take responsibility for saying no. Number 5, what does she need? Kathy needs to connect with others who will support her as she looks at the boundary issues between her and her friend. How does she begin? Kathy practices saying no with supportive friends. In a supportive atmosphere, she learns to disagree, to state her opinion, and to confront. They all pray for strength and guidance in this relationship. Number 7, how does she set boundaries? At their next lunch, Kathy tells Sharon about her feelings of being used and taken advantage of. She explains how she'd like a more mutual relationship. Then she lets her friend know that she won't be taking any more emergency babysitting jobs. Sharon, unaware of how she was hurting her friend, is genuinely sorry for the problem. She begins to take more responsibility for her schedule. After a few futile attempts to get Kathy to babysit at the last minute and having to miss a few important meetings, She starts planning for events a week or two ahead of time. This is the really fun part. When you realize what you've done wrong and you have the framework of the love of the Lord, now you get to show up differently for friendships and relationships. It's beautiful. It's so much fun. It's really precious. Number 8, what happens next? The friendship grows and deepens. Over time, Kathy and Sharon laugh over the conflict that actually brought them closer. This is true. I have a friend that we've really worked on this stuff together with, and now we laugh. We don't even recognize the people we were before we really started taking this stuff to heart. Okay, conflict 4, compliant, non-responsive. Remember the Marcia-Tammy friendship at the beginning of this chapter? See my previous YouTube video for that. One friend doing all the work and the other coasting illustrates the compliant, non-responsive conflict. One party feels frustrated and resentful. The other wonders what the problem is. Marcia sensed that the friendship wasn't as important to Tammy as it was to her. Let's analyze the situation. Number 1, what are the symptoms? Marcia feels depressed, resentful, and unimportant. Tammy, however, may feel guilty or overwhelmed by her friend's needs and demands. Number 2, what are the roots? Marcia always feared that if she didn't control her important attachments by doing all the work, she'd be abandoned. So she became a Martha to everyone else's Mary, a worker instead of a lover. Tammy has never had to work hard for friendships. Always popular and in demand, she is passively taken from important friendships. She has never lost anyone by not being responsive. In fact, they work harder to keep her around. So what is the boundary conflict? There could be 2 boundary conflicts here. First, Marcia takes on too much responsibility for the friendship. She's not letting her friend bear her own load. Second, Tammy doesn't take enough responsibility for the friendship. She knows that Marcia will come up with activities from which she can pick and choose. Why work when someone else will? Number 4, who needs to take ownership? Marcia needs to take responsibility for making it too easy for Tammy to do nothing. She sees that her attempts to plan, call, and do all the work are disguised attempts to control love. Yikes. Number 5, what do they need? Both women need support from other friendships. They can't look objectively at this problem without a relationship or 2 of unconditional love around them. How do they begin? Marcia practices setting limits with supportive friends. She realizes that she will still have friendships in which each friend carries her own weight if she and Tammy break off their friendship. Number 7, how do they set boundaries? Marcia tells Tammy about her feelings and informs her that she will need to take equal responsibility for their friendship in the future. In other words, after Marcia calls, she won't call again unless Tammy does. Marcia hopes that Tammy will miss her. Marcia hopes that Tammy will miss her and begin calling. If worst comes to worst and the friendship atrophies due to Tammy's unresponsiveness, Marcia has gained something. She has learned it wasn't a mutual connection in the first place. Now she can grieve, get over it, and move on to find real friends. What happens next? The mini crisis changes the character of the friendship permanently. It either exposes it for a non-relationship or it provides soil for the rebuilding of a better one. Questions about friendship and boundary conflicts. Boundary conflicts in friendships are difficult to deal with because the only cord tying the relationship together is the attachment itself. There's no wedding ring, no job connection. There's just the friendship, and it often seems all too fragile and in danger of being severed. People who are in the above conflicts often raise the following questions when they consider setting boundaries on their friendships. Question number 1, aren't friendships easily broken? Most friendships have no external commitment such as marriage, work, or church to keep the friends together. The phone could just stop ringing and the relationship would die with no real ripples in the lives of the participants. So aren't friendships at greater risk of breaking up when boundary conflicts arise? This type of thinking has 2 problems. First, it assumes that external institutions such as marriage, work, and church are the glue that holds relationships together. It assumes that our commitments are what hold us together and not our attachments. Biblically and practically, nothing could be further from the truth. Okay, this reminds me of my freshman year in college when I wasn't going to be coming home. I was going to college in another part of the country, and I wrote letters to so many people that meant so much to me during Thanksgiving break. I just wanted them to know that I was thinking of them and that I love them. And now it's funny because when Facebook got started, I reached out to so many people who had meant something to me, and so many of them were like, yeah, thanks, no. I was like, wow, okay, well, at least I know. So anyway, it's just interesting to think about that, like how one person feels towards somebody else may not be how they feel, and that's okay. All right. So aren't friendships at greater risk of breaking up when boundary conflicts arise? This type of thinking has two problems. First, it assumes that external institutions such as marriage, work, and church are the glue that holds relationships together. It assumes that our commitments are what hold us together, not our attachments. Biblically and practically, nothing could be further from the truth. Okay, so what does that even mean? If it's not work and church and those things that hold us together, what does? We hear this thinking in many Christian circles. If you don't like someone, act like you do, or make yourself love them, or commit to loving someone, or choose to love someone and the feelings will come. Choice and commitment are elements of a good friendship. We do need more than fair weather friends. However, Scripture teaches us that we can't depend on commitment or sheer willpower, for they will always let us down. Paul cried out that he did what he didn't want to do, and he didn't do what he wanted to do. He was stuck. We all experience the same conflict. Even when we commit to a loving friendship, bad things happen. We let our friend down. Feelings go sour. Simply white-knuckling it won't reestablish the relationship. We can solve our dilemma the same way Paul solved his. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. The answer is being in Christ Jesus. In other words, in relationship with Christ, both vertically and horizontally. As we stay connected to God, to our friends, and to support groups, we are filled up with the grace to hang in there and fight out the boundary conflicts that arise. Without this external source of connection, we're doomed to an empty willpower that ultimately fails or makes us think we're omnipotent. Again, the Bible teaches that all commitment is based on a loving relationship. Being loved leads to commitment and willful decision-making, not the reverse. How does this apply to friendships? Look at it this way. How would you feel if your best buddy approached you and said, I just wanted to tell you that the only reason we're friends is because I'm committed to our friendship. There's nothing that draws me to you. I don't particularly enjoy your company, but I will keep choosing to be your friend. You probably wouldn't feel very safe or cherished in the relationship. You'd suspect you were being befriended out of obligation and not out of love. Don't let anyone fool you. All friendships need to be based on attachment or they have a shaky foundation. The second problem with thinking that friendships are weaker than institutionalized relationships such as marriage, church, and work is in assuming that those three aren't attachment-based. It simply isn't true. If it were, wedding vows would ensure a 0% divorce rate. Professions of faith would ensure faithful church attendance. A hiring would ensure 100% attendance at work. These three important institutions, so critical to our lives, are to a large degree attachment-based. It's scary to realize that the only thing holding our friends to us isn't our performance or our lovability or their guilt or their obligation. The only thing that will keep them calling, spending time with us, and putting up with us is love. And that's the one thing we can't control. At any moment, any person can walk away from a friendship. However, as we enter more and more into an attachment-based life, we learn to trust love. We learn that the bonds of a true friendship are not easily broken, And we learn that in a good relationship, we can set limits that will strengthen and not injure the connection. Wow, guys, that was pretty intense. It was like 20 minutes of intenseness. Okay, so there's like 3 or 4 pages left. I'm going to try to get through it. Question number 2, how can I set boundaries in romantic friendship? Single Christians have tremendous struggles with learning to be truth tellers and limit setters in romantic dating relationships. Shocker. Most of the conflicts revolve around the fear of losing the relationship. Double shocker. A client may say, there's someone in my life whom I like a lot, but I'm afraid if I say no to him, I'll never see him again. Yeah, if that's what you're afraid of, run! A couple of unique principles operate in the romantic sphere. Number 1, romantic relationships are by nature risky. Many singles have not developed good attachment with other people and who have not had their boundaries respected. They try to learn the rules of biblical friendships by dating. They hope that the safety of these relationships will help them learn to love, be loved, and set limits. Quite often, these individuals come out of a few months of dating more injured than they were when they went in. They may feel let down, put down, or used. This isn't a dating problem. It's a problem in understanding the purpose of dating. The purpose of dating is to practice and experiment. The end goal of dating is generally to decide sooner or later whether or not to marry. I take issue with that. I have a different approach. I say don't date somebody that you wouldn't marry. That's my take. Okay, this is why this is not the audible version of the book, because I give you my opinion. Dating is a means to find out what kind of person we complement and with whom we are spiritually and emotionally compatible. It's a training ground for marriage. Okay, I have a totally different take on dating than this book. This fact causes a built-in conflict. When we date, we have the freedom to say at any time, this isn't working out, and to end the relationship. The other person has the same freedom. What does this mean for the person whose boundaries have been injured? Often, she brings immature, undeveloped aspects of her character to an adult romantic situation. In an arena of low commitment and high risk, she seeks the safety, bonding, and consistency that her wounds need. She entrusts herself too quickly to someone whom she is dating because her needs are so intense, and she will be devastated when things don't work out. This is a little like sending a 3-year-old to the front lines of battle. Dating is a way for adults to grow in various ways and to find out about each other's suitability for marriage. It's not a place for injured souls to find healing. This healing can best be found in non-romantic arenas, such as support groups, church groups, therapy, and same-sex friendships. We need to keep separate the purposes of romantic and non-romantic friendships. I just have such a different take on the whole thing. Anyway, it's best to learn the skill of setting boundaries in these non-romantic arenas where the attachments and commitments are greater. Once we've learned to recognize, set, and keep our biblical boundaries, we can use them on the adult playground called dating. Oh my gosh, that to me is setting it up for a nightmare experience. They're calling dating a playground? Good Lord, that's terrible. I'm sorry, I just have I'm not going to apologize. I have such a different take on it. I've been married for 20 years. That's pretty rare. 1 out of 2 marriages ended in divorce, and like in the first 5 years. It's terrible. So I don't know about this boundaries book and dating. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, this section is supposed to be about friends, not about dating. All right, I'm kind of spouting off quite a bit. But it's my video, so I get to spout off quite a bit. Let me know what you think. Okay. Let's see. It's best to learn the skill of setting boundaries in these non-romantic arenas. Okay, I spouted off on that. All right, number 2. Setting limits in romance is necessary. Individuals with mature boundaries sometimes suspend them in the initial stages of a dating relationship in order to please the other person. However, truth-telling in romance helps define the relationship. It helps each person to know where he or she starts and the other person stops. Ignorance of one another's boundaries is one of the most blatant red flags of the poor health of a dating relationship. We'll ask a couple in premarital counseling, where do you disagree? Where do you lock horns? When the answer is, it's just amazing. We're so compatible. We have so few differences. We'll give the couple this homework. Find out what you've been lying about to each other. If the relationship has any hope, the assignment will generally help. All right. Question number 3 for boundaries in your friends. What if my closest friends are my family? Boundary developing individuals sometimes say, but my mother or father or sister or brother is my best friend. They often feel fortunate that in these times of family stress, their best friends are the family in which they were raised. They don't think they need an intimate circle of friends besides their own parents and siblings. They misunderstand the biblical function of the family. God intended the family to be an incubator in which we grow the maturity, tools, and abilities we need. Once the incubator has done its job, then it's supposed to encourage the young adult to leave the nest and connect to the outside world, to establish a spiritual and emotional family system on one's own. The adult is free to do whatever God has designed for him or her. Over time, we are to accomplish God's purposes of spreading his love to the world and to make disciples of all the nations. Staying emotionally locked into the family of origin frustrates this purpose. It's hard to see how we'll change the world when we have to live on the same street. No one can become a truly biblical adult without setting some limits, leaving home and cleaving somewhere else. Otherwise, we never know if we have forged our own values, beliefs, and convictions, our very identity, if we are mimicking the ideas of our family. Can family be friends? Absolutely. But if you've never questioned, set boundaries, or experienced conflict with your family members, you may not have an adult to adult connection with your family. If you have no other best friends than your family, you may need to take a close look at those relationships. You may be afraid of separating and individuating, of becoming an autonomous adult. That can be a scary thing. All right, sunlight is like shining through the window right into my face. So I am going to scoot up. Okay, change position a little bit. I'm not sure that's going to be better. Question number 4, and the final question for this chapter of the book. How can I set limits with needy friends? I was talking to a woman one day in session who felt extremely isolated and out of control. Setting limits with her friends seemed impossible for her because her friends were in perpetual crisis. I asked her to describe the quality of her friendships. Oh, I've got lots of friends. I volunteer at the church 2 nights a week. I lead a Bible study once a week. I'm on a couple of church committees, and I sing with the worship team. I'm getting exhausted just listening to you describe your week, I said. But what about the quality of these relationships? Oh, they're great. People are being helped, they're growing in their faith, and troubled marriages are getting healed. You know, I said, I'm asking about friendships, and you're answering about ministries. They're not the same thing. She had never considered the difference. Her concept of friendship was to find people with needs and throw herself into a relationship with them. She didn't know how to ask for things for herself. And that was the source of her boundary conflicts. Without these ministry relationships, this woman would have had nothing. So she couldn't say no. Saying no would have plummeted her into isolation, which would have been intolerable. But it had happened anyway. She had come for help because of burnout. When the Bible tells us to comfort with the comfort with which we are comforted, it's telling us something. We need to be comforted before we can comfort. That may mean setting boundaries on our ministries so that we can be nurtured by our friends. We must distinguish between the two. This chapter has been really hard. And here's the final paragraph. A prayerful look at friendships will determine whether you need to begin building boundaries with some of your friends. By setting boundaries, you may save some important ones from declining. And when romantic dating relationships lead to marriage, you will still need to remember how to build and maintain boundaries, even in this most intimate of human relationships. My goodness. well, that's the end of chapter 8, and that's the end of my videos for today. I hope you have enjoyed them. If you are having questions after these chapters and you're like, wow, that was really hard. I don't have a support group. I don't have a church where they're talking about this stuff. Then send me a private message. Maybe I can help. I am a coach now. I'm doing life coaching in legacy, especially. That's my favorite thing. So helping you identify, asking you questions about what matters most to you, about the person that God has created you to be and how to live that out well. That's my specialty. So send me a message or give me a call. You can call me through Facebook and leave a message that way. I think, there are ways to leave audio messages through Facebook Messenger if that's easier for you. So I hope this has been useful. I hope you have an amazing Christmas Eve. This is being recorded on Christmas Eve. And now it's time for me to get to work on the other areas of my life. Have a great night, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.